My name is Rachel Kim. I'm 30 years old. At my engagement party, in front of 60 guests, my best friend of 15 years, Lauren, stood up during the toasts, took the microphone from the person passing it around, and told the entire room that she needed to say something for Rachel's own good, that everyone should know I'd only gotten engaged to my fiancé Marcus because of his family's money, that I'd always had a thing for men with trust funds. The room went dead silent. Marcus's family had never once mentioned money in front of me, and now 60 people were staring at me, waiting to see how I'd respond to an accusation delivered by someone who was supposed to be my closest friend. What Lauren didn't know, what nobody at that party except Marcus and his mother knew, was that I'd been the one who insisted on a prenup 3 months earlier, specifically because I understood, deeply and personally, how important it was that this marriage never be about anyone's money at all. Her silent revenge stories. If you've ever had someone attack your character at the exact moment you were happiest, comment "not this time" below. This one's for you. Lauren and I had been friends since college, a friendship that had survived years of distance, career changes, and the ordinary drift that eventually claims so many long-term friendships, sustained through genuine effort on both sides that I'd always considered one of the more reliable relationships in my adult life. We'd met during our first week of freshman year, assigned to adjacent dorm rooms, bonding quickly over a shared, specific sense of humor and a similarly complicated relationship with our own families. Lauren had been there for me through a difficult breakup in my mid-20s, through a stretch of unemployment that had tested my confidence considerably, through the ordinary ups and downs that define a genuine, long-term friendship. I want to be honest that our relationship had never been entirely uncomplicated, even in its better years. Lauren's own career, in a competitive creative field, had progressed considerably more slowly than she'd hoped, and I'd noticed, over the years, a specific undercurrent of comparison that occasionally surfaced during moments of my own success, nothing dramatic or overtly hostile, just a particular quality to her congratulations that sometimes felt slightly effortful rather than fully genuine. I met Marcus at a mutual friend's dinner party, roughly 2 years before this story takes place, an introduction that led, over the following months, into a relationship I came to understand as genuinely different from anything I'd experienced before, steady, communicative, built on a foundation of real compatibility rather than any of the more dramatic, unstable patterns I'd previously mistaken for passion in earlier relationships. Marcus worked as an architect at a mid-sized firm, and while his family did have some genuine financial comfort, his father had built a successful regional construction company decades earlier. Marcus himself lived, by any reasonable measure, an unremarkable professional life, earning a solid but hardly extravagant salary, renting a modest apartment, driving a car considerably older than what his family's resources might have suggested he could afford. I want to describe this specifically, because I think the actual, unglamorous reality of Marcus's day-to-day life matters enormously to understanding exactly how absurd Lauren's eventual accusation would turn out to be. This wasn't a relationship with some wealthy heir living an extravagant lifestyle. This was a relationship with a hard-working architect who happened to have a financially successful father, a distinction that apparently mattered less to Lauren, in the moment of her accusation, than the surface-level fact of his family's general comfort. I want to describe my own background regarding money and relationships, because I think it directly contradicts, in a specific and personal way, exactly the accusation Lauren would eventually level against me. I grew up in a household where my parents divorced when I was 12, a divorce complicated significantly by financial disputes that stretched across years of my adolescence. My father's business had failed shortly before the divorce, leaving my mother to navigate a genuinely difficult financial reconstruction of our family's life, one I'd watched unfold, close up, with a specific clarity that shaped my own values around money and relationships considerably more than most people my age had reason to develop. I'd watched my mother struggle, for years, with the financial consequences of a marriage that had entangled her finances completely with my father's, a struggle that had taught me, from a young age, the specific importance of financial independence and clear boundaries within any serious partnership, regardless of how much I loved someone or how stable the relationship felt in any given moment. This history, more than anything else, was why I'd been the one, 3 months before this engagement party, to raise the topic of a prenuptial agreement with Marcus directly, understanding it not as a hedge against our relationship's success, but as a specific, considered boundary I needed for my own peace of mind, built entirely from my own painful experience of what happens when financial entanglement isn't handled with genuine clarity from the start. I want to describe the actual conversation in which I raised the prenup with Marcus, because I think the specific details matter enormously to understanding exactly how backward Lauren's eventual accusation would turn out to be. We were having dinner at home, several months before the engagement itself, discussing our future in the general, exploratory way couples do when a serious commitment feels increasingly likely but hasn't yet been formalized. I brought up the topic directly, explaining my own family history and why financial clarity mattered so deeply to me personally. I want us to have a prenup, I told him. Not because I don't trust you, or because I think this won't work. Because I watched my mother's entire life get entangled with my father's finances in a way that took years to untangle, even after the marriage itself had clearly failed. I never want either of us to face that kind of complexity, regardless of how confident we both feel right now. Marcus, to his considerable credit, understood immediately, without any of the defensiveness or hurt feelings that sometimes complicate this specific conversation between couples. That makes complete sense, he said. I actually think that's a really healthy way to think about this. Let's talk to my family's estate attorney together, and figure out something that genuinely protects both of us equally. Marcus proposed 2 months later, a private, deeply personal moment that had nothing to do with any external audience or performance, just the two of us, on a hiking trail we'd frequented throughout our relationship, a location chosen specifically for its personal significance rather than any dramatic public display. I said yes without hesitation, understanding, in that moment, the specific culmination of everything we'd built together over the preceding 2 years, a relationship built on genuine compatibility, honest communication, and, notably, the exact kind of financial clarity I'd insisted on specifically because I understood how important it was to remove money as any kind of ambiguous factor in our commitment to each other. We finalized the prenup agreement, with both of our own independent legal counsel involved, about a month before the engagement party this story centers around, a process that had felt, throughout, like a genuine act of mutual respect and care, rather than anything remotely resembling the mercenary calculation Lauren would eventually accuse me of harboring. Marcus's parents offered to host our engagement party at their home, a genuinely generous offer that reflected the warm, welcoming relationship I'd built with his family throughout our 2 years together. His mother, Diane, in particular, had become someone I genuinely valued in my own life, a relationship built on real affection rather than any calculation about future family connections. I want to describe Diane specifically, because her role later in this story matters enormously to how everything ultimately unfolded. She was warm, direct, and possessed a specific, practical wisdom that I'd come to genuinely admire over our 2 years of knowing each other. She'd never once, in all our interactions, made any comment or gesture suggesting she viewed my relationship with Marcus through any lens of financial calculation or suspicion. Lauren was, of course, invited to the engagement party, given our 15-year friendship, though I want to be honest that our relationship, in the months leading up to this event, had carried a specific undercurrent of tension I'd noticed without fully naming directly, a quality to her enthusiasm about my engagement that felt, on reflection, somewhat effortful rather than fully genuine. The engagement party unfolded, for its first 2 hours, exactly as these celebrations typically do, genuine warmth, good food, the specific joy of family and friends gathering to celebrate a significant milestone in 2 people's lives together. I remember feeling, throughout that early portion of the evening, a specific, uncomplicated happiness I'd rarely allowed myself to fully experience, understanding, in real time, exactly how much genuine support and love surrounded Marcus and me as we prepared to build our life together. The toasts began around the 2-hour mark, a series of warm, genuine speeches from close family and friends, each one adding to the specific emotional richness of the evening. Marcus's father spoke movingly about watching his son find genuine partnership. My own mother offered a toast that brought several guests, including myself, to genuine tears, describing the specific joy of watching me build something considerably more stable than what she'd experienced in her own marriage. I had no reason, sitting there among that warmth, to anticipate what was about to happen. As the toasts continued, someone passed the microphone toward the section of the room where several of my close friends were seated, apparently anticipating that one of them might want to offer their own words. Lauren, seated near that group, reached for the microphone before anyone else had a chance to, standing with a specific, deliberate confidence that suggested, in retrospect, that this hadn't been a spontaneous impulse but something she'd been considering, perhaps for some time. "I want to say something," she began, her voice carrying a quality I initially mistook for typical toast-giving nervousness before understanding, within seconds, that something considerably more significant was unfolding. "I've known Rachel for 15 years, and I love her, but I think, out of real love, I need to say something for her own good." I felt a specific, immediate unease settle over me, watching Lauren's expression shift into something harder, more deliberate than the warm, celebratory tone the room had carried throughout the evening. "I need everyone here to understand something," Lauren continued, her voice carrying across the now quieting room. "Rachel has always had a thing for men with money. I've watched this pattern for 15 years. Every serious relationship she's had, there's been a specific financial comfort involved that I don't think is a coincidence. I love her, but I think she's using Marcus's family's money, whether she's fully aware of it herself or not, and I think somebody needed to say that out loud before this wedding actually happens." I want to describe the specific, disorienting silence that followed those words, because I think it captures something important about how completely an accusation this serious, delivered this publicly, can instantly transform a celebratory atmosphere into something entirely different. 60 guests sat in a stunned, uncomfortable silence, glancing between Lauren, still standing with the microphone, and me, sitting frozen at the head table, genuinely uncertain, for several long seconds, how to even begin processing what had just happened in front of everyone who mattered most to Marcus and me. I want to describe the specific effort of composing myself enough to respond, given how genuinely blindsided I felt by an accusation this serious, delivered by someone I'd trusted for 15 years, in front of every person whose respect and support mattered most to my future with Marcus. "Lauren," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be, "that's not true, and I don't understand why you'd say something like that here, tonight, in front of everyone." "I'm saying it because I love you," Lauren said, her voice carrying a specific, unwavering conviction that suggested she genuinely believed what she was saying, however wrong it actually was. "I've watched this pattern for 15 years, Rachel. I think you deserve honesty, even if it's uncomfortable to hear." Marcus, beside me, had gone visibly rigid with a specific, controlled anger I'd rarely seen from him, though he hadn't yet spoken, apparently as stunned as I was by the sudden, public turn the evening had taken. I want to describe how the broader room responded during those initial, disorienting moments, because I think the specific texture of that reaction mattered enormously to how the rest of the evening unfolded. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly uncertain how to process an accusation this serious delivered in what should have been an uncomplicated celebration. A few of Marcus's more distant relatives, people I didn't know well, appeared genuinely troubled by what they'd just heard, their expressions carrying a specific uncertainty about whether Lauren's accusation might contain some truth they hadn't previously considered. My own mother, seated near the front, had gone pale, her hand covering her mouth in visible distress at watching her daughter publicly accused of exactly the kind of financial calculation she herself had worked so hard, throughout my entire life, to teach me to avoid in my own relationships. I understood, watching these reactions unfold, that whatever happened next in the following minutes would significantly shape how this evening, and potentially my relationship with Marcus's broader family, would be remembered going forward. What happened next, I want to describe carefully, because it represents, in retrospect, the specific turning point that transformed what could have been a genuinely damaging public humiliation into something entirely different. Diane, Marcus's mother, stood up from her seat near the head table, her expression carrying a specific, quiet authority that immediately drew the room's attention away from Lauren and toward herself. She didn't raise her voice, didn't display any of the visible anger I might have expected given the accusation just leveled against her future daughter-in-law. "I think I need to say something," Diane said, her voice carrying easily across the now completely silent room. "Because I happen to know something relevant to what's just been said, and I think everyone here deserves to understand the actual truth." I watched her reach into a small bag she'd apparently brought with her, retrieving a folded document I recognized instantly, my heart rate climbing with a specific mixture of relief and disbelief at what I understood. Immediately, she was about to reveal. "This is a copy of Rachel and Marcus's prenuptial agreement," Diane said, holding the document visibly, though not opening it fully to reveal any private financial details. "I want to be clear about something important, given what's just been said tonight. This agreement wasn't Marcus's idea. It wasn't my idea, or my husband's idea, though we fully supported it once Rachel raised it. This was Rachel's idea, entirely her own, brought to Marcus months before their engagement, specifically because she wanted absolute clarity that money would never be a complicating factor in their marriage." I felt the entire room's attention shift, palpably, from the accusation Lauren had just made toward this new, contradicting information Diane was providing with such calm, deliberate authority. "Rachel came to us," Diane continued, "before Marcus even proposed, and asked for our estate attorney's information, specifically so she could ensure any prenuptial agreement would be drafted with her own independent legal counsel, protecting both her and Marcus equally. I don't think that's the behavior of someone using my son for his family's money. I think that's the behavior of someone who understands, more deeply than most people her age, exactly why financial clarity matters in a genuine partnership." I want to describe Lauren's reaction to this revelation, because I think the specific quality of her response mattered considerably to how the rest of our friendship eventually unfolded. Lauren's face, watching Diane speak, moved through several rapid shifts: initial confusion, then a specific, visible discomfort as she began processing exactly how thoroughly her accusation had just been contradicted by information she clearly hadn't anticipated existing. "I didn't know that," she said, her voice considerably smaller now than the confident, deliberate tone she'd carried moments earlier. "I wasn't aware of any prenup." "I understand you weren't aware," I said, finding my own voice again, steadier now with Diane's revelation having shifted the room's understanding so completely. "But I need you to understand something important. You made a serious, public accusation about my character, in front of 60 people who matter enormously to my future with Marcus, without any actual knowledge of the situation. You didn't ask me directly. You didn't raise any private concerns beforehand. You stood up and accused me, publicly, based entirely on assumptions you never bothered to verify. I want to take a moment to address, directly, why I'd made the specific choice to request a prenuptial agreement, given how central that choice became to correcting Lauren's accusation in front of the assembled guests. I want everyone here to understand something," I said, standing now myself, understanding that this moment required my own direct explanation rather than simply relying on Diane's account. I requested this agreement because I watched my own parents' divorce, years ago, become entangled in exactly the kind of financial complexity that made an already painful situation considerably worse. I never wanted that for Marcus and me, regardless of how confident I felt about our relationship. This agreement isn't evidence of any calculation about his family's money. It's evidence of exactly the opposite. A deliberate choice to remove money as any kind of factor in our commitment to each other. I watched several guests nod, visibly, with a specific understanding that suggested this explanation was genuinely landing, correcting whatever brief uncertainty Lauren's accusation might have introduced into their understanding of my relationship with Marcus. Marcus, who had remained largely silent through the initial shock of Lauren's accusation and his mother's subsequent correction, finally stood beside me, taking my hand with a specific, visible steadiness that I found genuinely grounding after the disorienting several minutes that had preceded it. "I want to say something too," he said, addressing the room directly. "Rachel is the person who insisted on this agreement. I want everyone here to understand that clearly. I've never once, in our 2 years together, felt like our relationship was about anything other than genuine partnership. If anything, her insistence on this kind of clarity is exactly why I trust her completely with the rest of our life together." He turned to Lauren directly, his voice carrying a specific, controlled firmness. "I understand you care about Rachel. But what you just did, standing up in front of everyone we love, making an accusation this serious without any actual verification, isn't protection. It's harm, and I think you need to understand the difference clearly before this evening continues." I want to describe how the remainder of the evening unfolded, because I think the specific texture of that recovery matters to understanding how thoroughly Diane's intervention had shifted the room's overall understanding of what had happened. Several guests approached me individually over the following hour, offering genuine, specific expressions of support that went beyond simply acknowledging the correction Diane had provided. My own mother, once she'd recovered from her initial distress, pulled me aside to tell me how proud she was, watching me handle such a public, difficult moment with genuine composure rather than losing control of the situation entirely. Diane herself found me later in the evening, offering a private, quieter conversation beyond her public correction. "I hope it was okay that I said something," she told me. "I've genuinely valued our relationship these past 2 years, and I wasn't going to sit quietly while someone made an accusation that unfair, especially not on a night that should have been entirely joyful for you and Marcus." I told her, genuinely, how grateful I was, understanding, in that moment, exactly how significantly her willingness to intervene had shaped the evening's ultimate outcome. Lauren left the party shortly after the confrontation, understandably uncomfortable remaining in a room where her accusation had been so thoroughly and publicly corrected. I want to describe the specific, complicated mixture of emotions I felt watching her leave, given our 15 years of genuine friendship despite everything that had just happened. She texted me the following morning, a message that read, in part, "I'm sorry for how I handled that. I should have talked to you privately instead of saying anything in front of everyone. I still think I had genuine concerns, but I handled them badly, and I understand if you need space. I want to be honest that this apology, while acknowledging the method of her accusation, still fell short of fully acknowledging the accusation's actual substance. She'd apologized for the public nature of what she'd said, without yet fully reckoning with whether the underlying accusation itself had been fair or accurate. I asked Lauren to meet me for coffee, about a week after the party, once I'd had genuine time to process everything and decide how I wanted to approach our friendship going forward. "I need you to understand something clearly," I told her, once we were seated. "I'm not upset simply because you embarrassed me in front of Marcus's family. I'm upset because you made a serious accusation about my character, one that contradicted 15 years of you actually knowing me, based on assumptions you never bothered to verify or even discuss with me privately first." "I know," she said, her voice carrying genuine discomfort. "I think I've been sitting with some complicated feelings, honestly, about my own life, my own relationships, and I let that spill into an assumption about you that wasn't fair." "What kind of complicated feelings?" I asked, genuinely wanting to understand the actual root of what had happened, beyond just the surface-level accusation itself. Lauren was quiet for a long moment before answering, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality than anything she'd offered previously, something closer to genuine, if still incomplete, self-examination. "I think watching you build this stable, secure life with Marcus, while my own career and relationships have felt so much more uncertain, brought up something I haven't fully dealt with," she admitted. "I think some part of me needed there to be an explanation for your happiness that didn't require me to just sit with my own comparative struggles honestly. Finding something about money felt like an easier story than admitting I'm genuinely envious of what you've built." "That's an explanation," I told her, "not an excuse. I appreciate you being honest about it, finally, but I need you to understand, your own envy or comparison isn't a justification for publicly attacking my character, especially not at a moment that should have been entirely about celebrating something good in my life." I sat with the question of how to proceed with our friendship for several weeks following that coffee conversation, wanting genuine time to understand what I actually wanted rather than reacting purely from the immediate hurt of the engagement party itself. I decided, ultimately, that I needed considerably more space and considerably more evidence of genuine, sustained change before I could extend Lauren the kind of close, trusting friendship we'd shared before this incident. I told her this directly, in a follow-up conversation several weeks later. "I don't think this is the end of our friendship," I told her. "But I need it to look different going forward. I need you to actually do the work of examining these comparison feelings, rather than just apologizing once and expecting things to return to how they were before. And I need real time to trust that you won't let those feelings surface again in some other damaging way." I want to describe, honestly, how my relationship with Lauren evolved over the following months, because I think the gradual, uneven nature of that evolution matters more than a clean, simple resolution would. Our contact, for the first several weeks, remained minimal and careful, both of us navigating the specific awkwardness of a friendship that had survived a genuinely serious rupture but hadn't yet rebuilt anything resembling its previous closeness. Gradually, Lauren began demonstrating, through consistent, specific actions rather than just words, a genuine effort at the self-examination I'd asked for. She started therapy, she told me eventually, specifically to work through the comparison and envy patterns that had apparently been building for longer than just the months leading up to my engagement. I noticed, over time, a specific, visible shift in how she engaged with my continued wedding planning, genuine, unforced enthusiasm that felt different from the effortful quality I'd noticed in the months before the party itself. Lauren attended our wedding, several months after the engagement party, though in a considerably more limited role than what I'd originally anticipated before everything happened, not as a bridesmaid, a role I'd initially planned for her before the incident, but as a guest, present and genuinely warm throughout the celebration, without the closer involvement our earlier friendship might have suggested was inevitable. I want to describe this specific outcome honestly, because I think it illustrates something important about how genuine repair, even when real and sustained, doesn't always fully restore a relationship to its previous form. I'd made peace with the fact that Lauren's role in my life, going forward, would likely remain more limited than it had been before her accusation, regardless of how genuinely she'd worked to address the underlying patterns that had produced it. People who hear this story sometimes expect me to say I cut Lauren out of my life entirely, that 15 years of friendship ended definitively the moment she made that accusation. It didn't happen quite that cleanly, and I think it's more honest to say so, even though the more dramatic version might feel more satisfying to imagine. What actually happened was more complicated, a genuinely serious, public betrayal, delivered by someone I'd trusted for over a decade, nearly damaged both my reputation with Marcus's family and the celebratory significance of what should have been an entirely joyful evening. Diane's willingness to intervene, with concrete evidence that directly contradicted Lauren's baseless accusation, mattered enormously to how quickly and completely the situation was corrected in the moment it mattered most. I used to think close, long-term friendships were relatively immune to this kind of sudden, dramatic betrayal, built as they were on years of accumulated trust and shared history. I've since learned that unresolved envy or comparison, left unexamined long enough, can eventually surface in genuinely damaging ways, regardless of how many years of otherwise genuine friendship preceded it. I found myself, in the months since this happened, sharing a version of this story with several friends navigating their own complicated dynamics around major life milestones and the specific tensions that sometimes arise when close friends' lives begin diverging in visible, significant ways. Document the things that matter, I tell them, not because you expect to need proof, but because you never know when someone's unexamined assumption might require actual evidence to correct. I never anticipated needing to publicly prove why I'd requested a prenup, but having that reality, and having someone willing to share it clearly, made all the difference in how quickly an unfair accusation could be corrected. I think about that advice often, turning it over for myself as much as for the friends I'm offering it to. My decision, months before the engagement itself, to request that prenuptial agreement had been made for entirely personal reasons related to my own family history. But that same decision ultimately became the exact evidence that definitively corrected a serious, public attack on my character, delivered at the worst possible moment by someone who should have known better. If there's a lesson in this, it's one I carry with me now every time I think about that specific, disorienting silence that fell over the room the moment Lauren made her accusation, and the equally significant silence that followed once Diane corrected the record with the actual truth. Character built over years, through consistent, demonstrated values rather than performance, creates its own kind of evidence, a documented history of choices, like a prenup I'd requested for entirely personal reasons, that can withstand even a serious, unfounded challenge, given the chance to be properly examined. What Lauren's accusation ultimately proved wasn't anything about my actual character. It proved how quickly unresolved envy, left unexamined for too long, can distort even a friend's understanding of someone she'd genuinely known for 15 years. I don't know if Lauren fully understood, in the moment she took that microphone, how close she came to permanently damaging a friendship that had survived so much before that single, painful evening. But I know, with complete certainty, that the actual truth of who I am, someone who'd insisted on financial clarity specifically because I understood, deeply and personally, why it mattered, spoke considerably louder than any fabricated assumption ever could, once given the proper chance to be heard, in front of the very people whose respect and support mattered most. If you've ever had your character attacked at the exact moment you were happiest, I'd love to hear how you handled it, and what happened next. Let me know in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one coming every week.